Hey South Hills, as a church, we have 8 values that define who we desire to be as a collective church and as individual followers of Christ. I think it's important to share these values and what they really mean with all of you. The value I want to unpack today is we grow more in circles than we do in rows. This simple phrase carries a profound wisdom about the transformative power community has in our lives. Attending church services, singing songs, and listening to inspiring sermons can be uplifting and encouraging, and it should be, but true transformation and growth happens when we step beyond the rows and find ourselves in circles of authentic community. As we do life together, we tap into something incredible. We can become better, smarter, healthier, and more fulfilled people. That's why we are intentional about creating space and activities for people to connect and build relationships. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 24 and 25 reminds us of this very thing. Discover creative ways to encourage others and to motivate them towards acts of compassion, doing beautiful works as expressions of love. This is not the time to pull away and neglect meeting together, as some have formed the habit of doing. In fact, we should come together even more frequently, eager to encourage and urge each other onward as we anticipate the day dawning. This week, I encourage you to stick around after service, grab lunch with someone new, join a small group, or find a team where you can serve with others. Let's lay down our excuses and instead take a step in this journey of growth and community.
Can you state your name and if you're Republican or Democrat?
My name's Rick and I'm a
My name's Ed and I'm very set in my ways when it comes to certain things.
We did have very different opinions, and we are very strongly willed people and are very strongly verbal about how we feel about certain subjects.
I may be right, I may be wrong, but I'm very passionate about things.
We really butted heads a lot of times on that. Sometimes almost came to blows a couple times.
I want to say it was Easter Sunday.
I think it was. Oh my goodness.
Because we were wearing hats, and you threw a hat at me, and I threw it back. That particular Sunday, service was over, and we had stepped outside into the courtyard, and we started talking about a particular topic that quickly escalated into quite a heated discussion. From there, it came to the point where if either he or I didn't literally take a step back, it would have been taking a step forward for a very different reason. I stormed off, he stormed off. Our wives were like, what in the world is going on? I remember saying, he's not welcome in my house, ever. Never again is he welcome in my house.
Like I said, if I didn't walk away, we might have thrown blows. And like I said, in retrospect, it's so silly to think about, but I think it's on both of our parts, it's this indignation that how dare you don't agree with my opinion, that has to be the only possible truth.
So moving forward from that particular Sunday, it was a struggle, but we're married to 2 sisters that love each other very much. So it was a little unfair and challenging for them, and I'm sure very tense. And I think at that particular time, it wasn't taking much for either Rick or I to blow the top.
I was very disrespectful, and I didn't realize it at the time because I was being too busy being right. Ed was the one who extended the olive branch, and the fact that he was willing to do that really touched me.
For me, or where I started to see things a little bit differently, was the fact that I couldn't divorce him, right? We're family, and you're not going to avoid family your whole life. I mean, I guess you could, but that's really no way to live. So we started to try to find things that were a little bit more common ground.
We went and saw Kiss together. And that was the beginning of the mending of our relationship. And I took responsibility for my part, and he did the same. And we realized that it's just not anything worth fighting over.
It made life easier for everybody. for Rick and I, but for the entire family as well. And you don't realize how much you're affecting an entire group of people when you're so into your political beliefs.
It was during a church sermon that it really convicted my heart that particular day for some reason. God is like, love your neighbor like yourself. Not if he has the same political views as you. Love everyone regardless of whatever their beliefs are. I've never been so convicted that those relationships are so far more important than your belief in a political party.
I'll be the first one to say that this has been one heck of a road trip, right, that we've been on. And it's one that didn't start out well at all, but I think that we understood that regardless of how we feel politically, our tie, both as Christians and as family members, is more important and has more value than any political side of anything that we could talk about or disagree with.
I've come to learn and accept that I love you as a brother. And family is way more important than any disagreement we can have over some stupid political issue. And I think something else we've come to realize too, and I think is a great part of our relationship, is we need each other.
Yeah, we do. We're married as sisters.
We're married as sisters. So we become good allies despite our differences politically. And I think that's a great thing. And like I said, regardless of how you feel about things politically, I've come to respect you and love you as a brother.
It's not true. Now Laura's going to take it
Don't
personal.
try to vote. We gotta save America.
All right, it's great to be with you guys. My name is Jeff Fernandez. If I have not met you, I'm one of the pastors here on staff at South Hills, and I serve on what's called the Central Team. And if you don't know, South Hills is a family of churches in many different locations, all the way from Norfolk, Virginia to Ohio, and right here in Manhattan Beach. Golly, it is a beautiful morning. It reminds me of where I'm from, which is just up the road in Newport Beach, Costa Mesa. And I was very tempted to surf this morning and skip out, but instead we're going to be opening up God's Word, which is a great thing. I'm so glad to be with you guys. We are in the midst of a 4-week series called Political Powder Keg. And you may be wondering or even feeling, oh my goodness, there's two things I always want to avoid in church. It's sermons on money and sermons on politics, right? Or you may be the type of person where you're like, oh yeah, finally, politics. The church is going to talk about it, and they're going to validate everything that I think, right? Well, the way that we are kind of slicing the pie for this entire series, and by the way, I love that we are doing this series and that the leadership and some of the head leadership of our church decided to do this series just even in a time where we're not reacting to anything, because we want to be proactive in our conversations. And so the lens in which we're seeing this series is through relationships and influence. It's like if we were to talk about money. We could approach it in a way that is very practical on how to manage your money, how to get rid of debt. If you've taken a Financial Peace University class with Dave Ramsey, there's a way to do that. Or we can talk about money through the lens of generosity and how to bless other people. Or we can talk about money through the lens of what it can do to your heart if you let it take hold of it. So the lens in which we are using to unpack this whole kind of conversation of politics, which is just really a shell, is about influence and relationships. And so here's what we won't do in this series. Here's what I won't do this morning if I'm going to just disappoint you. I'm not going to tell you how to vote this morning. Woo, all right, amen for that, right? Or I'm also not going to bash anybody or any organization. That's just not what we're going to do in this entire series. But over the last 4 years, there have been people in the church that have left their church family in order to be a part of a political family. Or I've heard the stories and I've been a part of and I've seen it up close where people say, you know what, my church doesn't talk about politics enough, or they don't align with me in this realm of politics, so I'm out. I've gone to this church for 10, 20 years, but now they're going in this direction because now they're talking about this stuff. Now they've gone in this direction. Now I'm out. Or on the flip side of it, I've heard the same exact stories to where people are saying, we don't talk about it enough, so I'm out, right? This stuff is real. But what's interesting is that the stories that are rare and possibly even non-existent are of the folks dying to their political party in order to get closer to their church family. Have you ever heard of one of those stories? Can South Hills, can you be one of those people to say, you know what, for some things, I'm actually going to die to some sort of preferences or opinions, which we're going to get to in a second, in order to draw nearer to the beautiful, eclectic organism known as the church. But that is God's mission and plan to bring his hope into the world. So here we go. And because I think what happens is a lot of the stuff that is driving this reactionary sort of way of living, and you already know this, by the way, is fear. It's fear. Fear oftentimes is the main tactic that is used in politics. And according to the American Psychological Association, fear-based messaging in politics is twice as effective as messaging that doesn't employ fear. You know this. You already know this. Sherry Harder, who is an author, theologian, says this. This is great. Dwelling on fear and outrage is spiritually deforming. The reason why it's spiritually deforming is because fear entices us to place our faith in a person, party, or platform that promises to protect us from whatever they've conceived us to fear. By the way, this is nothing new, folks. If you ever open up your Old Testament and just close your eyes, flip open a page, and plant your finger somewhere, you will oftentimes find God's people struggling with fear. So what do? Whenever they worship or decide to take a false god or a false idol, last time I was here, I think it was on the 23rd of July, we talked about this false god named Baal. It was Baal, which was a Canaanite god that God's people chose to adopt. Why? Because that god was the provisionary god of rain. And what was God's people struggling with? It hadn't rained in 3 years. So they had a fear that God wasn't showing up and that God cared enough for them. So they turned their attention to this false god, Baal, and they start worshiping him. And there was consequences for that. So what drives us? Oftentimes it can be fear. And as the long-time famous theologian, Master Yoda says, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. And don't we see some suffering in our world? So what exactly do we fear? We fear loss of control, we fear loss of opportunity, provision, wealth, our culture, our freedom. We fear our own progress. We fear the loss of this. We fear, and if you're like me, admittedly, I genuinely don't fear this. And I don't fear loss that much for my own self. You know who I fear it for? My kids. I'll take the hit. But just leave my kids out of it. Don't let that policy happen, or don't do this, because I am fearful of what their lives may be like. But it is still fear that lives here. And if we're not careful, will act on it or even react on it, and we can become divided. It is becoming increasingly common for us to be more comfortable around people that align with us politically than of people who share the same faith. And this matters because Christians have decided to judge, resent, separate from, point the finger at, and even hate other Christians based on political differences, saying things like, how could you love Jesus and vote that way? How could you say that you follow Jesus and support that policy? How could you say that that person is the president that you support or that politician that you support and step into church and claim to be a Jesus follower? By the way, that is me. I have said that. I have definitely thought that many times. This is a perfect place for imperfect people, and I have to be the first to raise my hand that I am in that boat. But what happens is that non-Christians, see, this is what happens, guys. I was really thinking about this. What happens is that non-Christians can end up looking into the church. As you say, come to church. Come be a part of our family. And they look into church and they say, is that how you treat your family? Because if that's how you treat your family, I don't want any part of it. What difference is your family from all the other ones out there? I don't want to be a part of that family if that's how you guys act and behave and not even treat the people outside the church, but even just treat one another. No, thank you. So Jesus was aware of the danger that this posed, and so he talked about it. And so we're going to look at John's gospel, John chapter 17. So if you have your Bibles, you could turn to John 17. We're going to start in verse 1. We're going to jump around a little bit just for time's sake. John 17, verse 1. Jesus is coming to the end of his ministry, so he knows that the cross is in front of him. The journey of the cross, the journey of being beaten and tortured and dying is in front of him. He knows what's coming. So he takes some time to be with his heavenly Father. By the way, if you guys are like feeling like, oh man, we're talking about politics, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells, this is like a little cringy. There was a golden retriever that ran in here in the last service, and I wish he would just run in here right now. It just made everything all better. He could just sit at my feet. Okay, back to the Gospel of John. What does Jesus say? Jesus spoke these things, and raising his eyes to heaven, he said, Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son so that the Son may glorify you. Verse 11, because he kind of reiterates some of those things in the next 9 or 10 verses. Verse 11, I am no longer going to be in the world, and yet they themselves, talking about the disciples, his followers, they themselves are in the world, and I am coming to you. Holy Father, keep them in your name, the name which you have given me, so that they may be one just as we are. Basically, Jesus is saying, my disciples and my followers, I'm praying that when they see me, they see you. When people run into the disciples, when people run into Jesus followers, do they look and act like Jesus? Because me, being Jesus, I have kept oneness with you. So in the ways that I have acted, in the ways that Jesus has acted, he has always pointed to his heavenly Father and what his Father was like. Very plainly, if you want to know what God is like, you look to Jesus. Verse 20. I'm not asking on behalf of these alone, but also for those who believe in me through their word, that they may all be one, just as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they may be in us, so that the world may believe that you sent me. The glory which you have given me, I also have given to them, so that they may be one, just as we are one. I'm linking these together. I in them and you in me, that they may be perfected in unity, so that the world, this is so key, so that the world may know that you sent me. You love them just as you love me. Who is this prayer for? This prayer is for anybody that would call themselves a disciple or a follower of Jesus. So if you say, hey, Jeff, I'm a Christian, this prayer is for you. And what is the prayer? The prayer is that when people run into you, do they run into God? That is what Jesus is praying. As they run into you, would they run into my likeness? Would they be unified so much in me that people would unmistakably say, oh, there's Jesus. I had a friend of mine tragically pass away suddenly in the middle of the night a few years ago. His name was Randy. Wonderful, incredible man. Father of 2 young boys. And he passed away, and a year later, I was talking to his wife, Megan, another incredible person, and I was like, Megan, Randy is so inspiring to me, but I really struggle because, I feel like I can never be Randy. I feel like I can never be like him. I'm so inspired by his life, but I can never really be Randy. And she's, oh, Jeff, well, that's a relief to hear, because all of the things that you would say are so great about Randy, that was Christ in him. And you can have Christ in you too. And so Randy would even say that the patience, because he was a very patient person, he was very present, that all of that was because he just let Jesus into his life enough. And it took over more and more throughout the years. And then when people would run into Randy, they would just run into Jesus. Oh, man, I want that. I want that. Bob Goff, who's an author, kind of famous Christian author right now. Many of you guys, many people don't know, he was a lawyer for a living, so he would talk about how he wins arguments for a living. But this is what he likes to say. I don't want people to run into my opinions. I want them to run into Jesus. And Jesus had an unlimited list of things that he could pray for, but the things that he prayed for you before his journey to the cross would be, Father, I'm paraphrasing. This is the Jeff version of the Bible. Father, I just pray that when people run into Jeff, they run into me so that the world would know who I am. Here's the big idea of the message. And before I say the big idea, let me throw out this disclaimer. It does not mean that we all agree on everything. And it also does not mean that you are not to have opinions. I'm going to get to that in a second. But here's what we know. Difference is inevitable. Division is a choice. For those that are married, you know this all too well, right? We have differences in our relationships, in our marriages, in our work dynamics, right? But the division part, that is a choice, right? We are going to have disagreements on certain levels of certain things, whether it's intense stuff, political stuff, who unloads the dishwasher, it's always me, but who does that? But division, that is a choice. And sometimes, you know what I'm talking about? Like that division that just kind of lives in your heart to where now you've stopped disagreeing about the project out there and now you have division to the person. And you may be saying, yeah, Jeff, you are making little of the things, though, that matter. Because if I take the foot off the gas on this one, if I relinquish control on this, if I don't speak up, if I don't make a stand for this policy, for this thing that's going to happen, or if I choose to not step into this, and if I choose to just let this go, if I choose to not speak the truth, this stuff is going to change our schools. This stuff is going to change the church. This stuff is going to change my business, our landscape. This is going to change everything. So I can't take the foot off the gas of anything because you don't know. You don't know what it's going to be like if that stuff plays out. Here's what I want us to look at. I would say and argue we have 3 different levels of how we filter this out. First level. Opinions. Opinions. I have a lot of opinions. I have plenty of them. If you ever want to know all of the opinions I have on politics or whatever it is, just buy me a coffee or buy me a beer and we can hash it out. You can ask questions. I have plenty of opinions. Plenty of them. The second level in which we have After opinions, we have beliefs. Beliefs I have less of, but the beliefs matter just a little bit more, right? The beliefs matter just a little bit more. And some of these things, it's a little harder for me to change my mind on. Some of these things I'm going to speak up a little bit more on. The third level, the most important level, convictions. And if I'm being honest, if I'm really being honest, I probably only have about 5. I can count them on one hand. Convictions are the things that I would die on the hill for and take to the grave. Here's how, this is just me personally, so you're probably filtering through, okay, no. Here's how I personally filter out what is a conviction, what gets the status of a conviction, and what's the belief and the opinion. Here's what I do. On opinions and beliefs, I will never break relationship with, jeopardize the relationship with, or lose influence over an opinion or a belief issue. Okay? I will never do that. Convictions are the things that I would break relationship with. So if somebody said, I wasn't going to tell you one of my convictions, but I'm going to tell you one now. But if somebody said, Jeff, in order to be my friend, you have to denounce Jesus as Lord. That's a conviction for me. Sorry, we can't be friends. But a lot of other stuff, if I'm honest, kind of filters down to the belief or the opinions. And here's where the church, and here's where I myself, and possibly you, but this is where we start getting into trouble, folks, is when we take things that are a level of an opinion issue and we elevate them to a conviction. That's where we start finding ourselves in trouble. Because it's like, really? Really? Over that? You're going to leave your family over that? Really? You're going to fight because of that? It's not that it's not important, but just recognize that's a belief issue. That's a belief issue. And is that worth giving up the relational equity, especially, and this is just me, but especially with a non-Christian who I want to pray for, care for, and be in their life? Really? So oftentimes, I just want people to run into Jesus, not my opinion. So sometimes I'm just, okay, I'll just be quiet on that one. But in the right context, let's talk. Ask me all the questions. Ask me all the questions. And I want to say this. I thought about not saying this, and then I felt convicted to not say it. So I'm going to say it very gently, and I'll try to say it lovingly. If you feel like that everything is a conviction issue for you, you probably have none. You just want to win and be right. I'm going to tell you an embarrassing story. I was on staff at a church, previous church I worked at. I had these 2 wonderful gals working underneath me. And these gals, they weren't the best of friends, but, they got along, and, they were great employees. And one day, 30 minutes before church was starting, they pulled me aside and they said, hey, Jeff, we have a disagreement. We need you to come into this room and help us sort this out. And so I'm like, okay, whatever, it's right before church. They had a disagreement. This is not an exaggeration. I'm not making this up. They had a disagreement on the design of the name tags that the volunteers would wear and if their names would be on the front. So I'm just thinking, okay, it's a little disagreement. I'm just going to, moderate this and let them, find their way in it. And all of a sudden, I'm realizing, oh my goodness, they start going at it, blah, 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 blah. And I try to step in. Oh, hey, wait, hold on. And then one of them says, no, we need to hash this out. Sit down. They said that to me, their boss. Okay, well, I'll get out of the way. And then I just realized there is something going on here. And they just start going from the disagreement about the project and the problem solving to now personally attacking each other. And I felt gross. But I realized, okay, they have to let this out. like let them fight. This is right before we're about to start singing worship songs, all right? I'm like, great, now I have to get up here on stage and sing Great Are You, Lord, et cetera, et cetera. And so they're hashing this out. And it gets to a certain point where I have to step in between them, put my arms in between them, and I said, enough, sit down. I said a potty word, too, because they were saying them. So I had to get their attention, right? And so what happens is like they lose control. It goes from disagreement about the project to disagreement of the person, then to vitriol for the person, then attacking, then dehumanizing, then hating. Don't we see this? So we do this follow-up. Okay, we let a few days go. Let's do a follow-up with them, bring in another moderator, and we are kind of in a non-heated now time and place, going back to that scenario. So what happened, blah, 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 let's talk about it, and it starts rising again. And I said to the girl, I said, okay, well, maybe this might be helpful. So stupid for me to say that. Well, maybe this is helpful. Why don't you just think, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is this for you? 10 being, I'm going to die on the hill of this. 1 to 10, and then, so as you go forward, as you guys try to problem solve and work on these projects together, like 1 to 10, and she looks at me and she goes, everything is a 10! And I just went like, okay, that is why, and so here's what was so sad, you guys. That relationship was so fractured, it was never the same. It never came back from it. It never came back from it. 2 people on staff at a church under my leadership. Oh, I still think about it to this day. So what does Jesus say in the book of John? John chapter 13, verse 34. I am giving you a new commandment, that you love one another just, and then this is the part to highlight or underline if you got a Bible with you, just as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. By this, I am giving you a new commandment. This is not a suggestion, folks. This is not a dose of some godly wisdom. This is a command. It's not one of those things where it's like, oh, okay, the command, okay, like what's the original Greek in that? Does that really mean that? Like, well, love, okay. No, love one another. Love one another. And then here's the thing that's so great. We all know the golden rule, right? Treat people the way you want to be. Right. Jesus rewrites the golden rule. He says, you know what I got? I got the platinum rule for you guys. Check this out. Love people not the way that you would want to be loved. I want you, if you're a Christ follower, if you're a Jesus follower, you're not off the hook on this. Here's the new rule. Here's the platinum rule. You love people as I have loved. As I have loved, not the way that you want to be loved. And I don't know about you folks, but the way that I would want to be loved can oftentimes be a little shifty, But if Jesus is your compass, and if you go back to, hey, our call is to love in the way that Jesus would love. The golden rule is dead, folks. If you call Jesus Lord, our job is to love the way Jesus would love. So here's a way that I like to say this as I kind of look at this. You cannot do Jesus' work without doing it Jesus' way. You cannot go from point A to point B to point C to point D without doing it how Jesus would do it. Because oftentimes, I think what happens in our churches and what we see in the scriptures is that we say, we got to get to the what? We have to get to the end of the road, and whatever means necessary that it takes to get there, we're going to do it. The most efficient way to go to point A to point B, that's the way we're going. I didn't share this in the last service, but I feel like I should share it right now. When Jesus was on trial, God's people had the choice to choose between Jesus and Barabbas. Barabbas was a Jewish zealot who was a warrior, who fought, who killed. Why did they choose Barabbas? Because they thought he would get more things done than Jesus would, than the homeless, wandering teacher. You cannot do Jesus' work without doing it Jesus' way. And another way you can say this is how you hold your theology is just as important as what you hold or how you hold your politics, whatever they may be. I'm not telling you how to vote this morning. How you hold your politics is just as important as what you hold. Because I don't know about you, but for me, this is what I tend to do. I'm so right. And I got the what right. If anybody can just understand and just like understand the what and get it and the what and what I hold on the what, if that can just be played out, then we'll all be good, right? And I can use any sort of means or strategy as long as somebody agrees with me on my what, but I can lose the how along the way. And how did Jesus get things done? What was his mode of transportation? What was his strategy? It's two things all throughout his life. Love and truth. That was Jesus' weapon for getting things done, advancing his kingdom, is truth and love. The enemy of the church is not another political party or the people in it. The enemy of the church is Satan. Let me be very clear on that, folks. What is his weapon? Division and lies. And that strategy has not changed since the beginning of time, Genesis 3:1. What did he do? Lied. Did God really say? Did God really say? And then what was the implication of that? Division. Man and woman were divided, and then their relationship with God was divided. The way forward is simple, but not easy. We must choose people over politics. We must choose to love one another even when we disagree and are hurt by one another. So practically, how can we disagree politically and love unconditionally? Another way I like to say loving unconditionally, very practically, is loving with no strings attached. I love you with no strings attached. I'm loving you without just trying to get something out of it or for my own benefit. So number one, here's how we can practically get there. So let's kind of drill this down. Number one, humility. It all starts with the recognition that I and you are broken and don't have everything figured out. By the way, if you come across somebody that thinks that they do, think again. Another dose of humility. Again, if you're a Jesus follower, here's a nice little reminder. It says in the book of Genesis that you're formed from the dust of the earth. And where do you think you're going when you're done with this world? Back there. From the dust we are formed, and to the dust we will return. That should keep us humble. Our own mortality should keep us humble. Really practically, we could also pursue something called epistemic humility. Epistemic humility is grounded in the realization that our knowledge is always provisional and incomplete, and that it might require revision in light of new evidence. Here's another way to think about this. Instead of always trying to be right, just focus on being less wrong. This approach invites us to start from a place where we acknowledge we have much to learn. One of the things I do in my job here at South Hills, I interview everybody that comes on staff. No matter if they're a campus pastor or a children's director, I interview everybody. And I always ask this question in an interview. What is something that you've changed your mind on? Because I want to see their response. Right? And if people say, nah, I've never changed my mind on anything. Okay, well, let's move on. Next. Alexander Solzhenitsyn says this: if only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessarily only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them, but the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. Basically just saying, all of us are capable of evil and good. That should keep us humble and to say, maybe I don't know everything. I think I'm right on everything, but I continue to be proven wrong. The second thing we can do is perspective. Where you stand depends on where you sit. In other words, in many ways, our cultural context, aka where we sit, determines our perspective. I spent a year and a half of my life in my late teens, early 20s-ish, living in Japan, Tokyo, Japan. And I was living there with a family. This guy was a pastor of a church. One of the things I learned there is the Japanese culture is beautiful, beautiful, beautiful culture, but also very dark. Very dark. When I lived there, the Christian population at the time, I haven't checked what it is recently, but when I lived there, it was 0.03% Christian. Very difficult people group to bring the gospel to and to preach the good news of Jesus. Here's one of the main reasons why. And I didn't understand this for months and months and months and months and months living there, because I'm like, why don't people get it? In an honor-shame culture, it's near impossible. They do not have a word to translate grace. There's no word that translates grace because there's no cultural context for it. You have to have culture in order to create a linguistics, right? Why is there no cultural concept of grace? Because in an honor-shame culture, when you have a debt, but you don't repay the debt, you feel shame. So the idea of grace and grace being given only makes people feel shameful. So it's very difficult to say God's grace abounds for you. You feel, ooh, I got to pay that back. This is a debt-debtor relationship, and our society is built on it. Folks, I would not have remotely known that, let alone actually felt it and had that perspective by not experiencing it myself. Because for months I was like, well, why don't they just get it? You know? I mean, it makes sense. It's all in the Bible. It's so great. It's so great. Why can't we catch it? The third thing, proximity. There's an old African proverb that says, from afar, it's a monster. From a distance, it's an animal. From up close, a person. Face to face, it's my brother. We've all become all too comfortable with separating ourselves from others based on their political leanings. In fact, for many, it's given permission to dehumanize others. Stanford study says this: there's no corresponding pressures to moderate disapproval of political opponents. In fact, the rhetoric and behavior of party leaders suggests to voters that it is perfectly acceptable to treat opponents with disdain. In this sense, individuals have a greater freedom to discriminate against out-of-party supporters. Simply stated, politics is the one place in our society where hatred and disgust of the other is actually accepted. And at times, it's even applauded as patriotic. Much of the news we consumed is to stay informed. It actually, you guys have to really think about this, does it actually help you to love others in the way that Jesus would? I want to step out of my notes for a second because I think this is the part as Jesus followers where we may just need to pump the brakes a little bit and say, okay, is this an opinion issue? Is this a belief issue? Or is this a conviction issue? Is it really? And how then do you filter that out? How then do you filter that out? Is this a belief thing? Is this opinion? And even if we disagree on policy, we're still expected to view and love people a certain way. We're not, in the 10 Commandments, it says we're not supposed to lie or slander. But here is this one's brutal. Oh. Even if you feel 100% right, and that person out there is your enemy because they are going to do irreparable damage, What does Jesus call us to? Love your enemies. Oh, I don't think we talk about that enough in church. I had a professor that said to me, you know, Jeff, if all you ever do is pray for your friends and family, God doesn't need you. You got to get used to starting to pray for your enemies regularly. Otherwise, what good are you? He was kind of brutal like that. But man, that has not left me. Jesus calls us to love and pray for our enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Matthew 5:43-45. If you want to talk politics without torching your relationships, you need to choose love even when you don't love their policies, allowing differences while fighting against division. And again, recognize we will have differences. I'm not telling you to not have an opinion. I'm not even telling you to not have a belief and to hold strongly to those beliefs. But think through in a matter of what is most effective, influential, and loving. I said this at the last service. If I wanted, because people ask me, will you ever bring politics into the pulpit? I said, no. Here's the reason why. Because it doesn't allow for nuance in a conversation, and I can divide the room immediately. I can say something, and half of you will immediately agree with me, and I'll reinforce your yes. And then the other half will say, well, see, I knew he always thought that, and walk out. But if you want to buy me a cup of coffee and you want to hear all the things, I am an open book, baby. So think about how to live this out. Embrace humility, acknowledge perspectives, and pursue proximity with people. So here's a really practical action step. Take note this week. Do you feel more camaraderie with people who share your faith or agree with your politics? Again, if you want to take this a step further, you may already be thinking right now, think through what are really the conviction issues for me? Like really, at the end of the day, like is that a conviction thing? Or is that a belief thing? I think that will help give you legs to this and actually be able to walk into a room or share a table with the people you may disagree with. Maybe it's family members. Maybe it's your church family. You can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family, folks. Let's close in prayer together. God, it's my prayer that we would be people who put you on display. Help us to get out of the way enough with our own opinions and the things that would be a stumbling block way before people even get to you. Help us to get out of the way in those things. Help us to walk a life that is marked by humility. So when people stumble across us, they're unmistakably stumbling into you. To when they say, oh, I just ran into Jeff, but it was actually a little bit more like Jesus. Fill us with the humility and the courage to be able to live and walk that out. And I pray particularly for those that may be in a camp of just struggling with a fear that has just lived there for a long time. And it's very valid. And it's very valid. And it probably has a lot of good reasons. But God, we recognize you are not a God of fear. You're a God of control, of provision, of kindness and grace and love. Amen. Amen.
South Hills Church, I just want to take a moment and say thank you for watching our service online. Whether you're watching it for the first time or you're watching it again because you enjoyed the service so much from the weekend, I'd like to take a moment and dive into our giving. Every week we give people the opportunity to give back and give to the local church so that God can continue to bless your lives and bless your finances. Here at South Hills, we believe that everything comes from God. We believe that He's the one that chose us and brought us into this world, gave us our gifts and talents and abilities. And I just want you to know that when we give, we are giving back what God has already given to us. If you've ever seen any of our envelopes at a South Hills campus, you'll see on there that it says, every week at South Hills, your generosity is giving people the opportunity to live a better story. And there's a scripture on there in Matthew chapter 6, verse 21 that says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So I want to encourage you today to click down below and set up your giving, whether it's for the first time or whether you're doing reoccurring giving. We have 4 ways to give here at South Hills. 1, you can do it in person at any of our campuses through an envelope. Or 2, you can actually text any amount that you would like to 84321. And the 3rd way is to download our Church Center app. I encourage you to do this one because the Church Center app gives you opportunity to stay connected with our church and your campuses. It's a great tool and resource for you to know what's going on. And the 4th way to give is to give online. You can go to southhills.org/give and you can set up your giving there. Whether you're a guest of our church or whether you are a member of our church, or whether you simply just like to watch our services, I encourage you to trust God with your finances so that He can bless and anoint your finances, and you can be trusting God in this journey of living life to the fullest. I love you, and thank you for watching our online service today.